Hi, everybody. I am David, and welcome to week 4 of Educational Leadership 655 Pupil Services and Non-Discrimination with Viterbo University. This week begins on Monday, February 14th, and concludes on Sunday, February 20th, 2022. Let's begin with a recap. Your SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, was due on February 12th. I'll download all of the SWOTs, print them off, I grade them by hand, scan them, and then I will return them to you this week. So when I return them, I'll put a comment in the announcements section saying, hey, they're graded, go in and check them out. At that time, I will also enter all of your course grades through week 3. Good job looking into CESA services that are currently contracted by your district, and also to browse the services in the link that I provided so you can find out, hey, here's something my CESA offers, maybe for mental health training or for responsive classroom, for mentoring new staff. So that's actually a newer feature with CESA, and I think it's a tremendous asset to look to explore what's out there. And again, if the CESA doesn't have it, contact them and say, here are the needs that we have in the district. I've reviewed your menu, your catalog of services, and I can't find a match in there. Let's have a talk. So we are moving rapidly to outsourced professional development. It's just what's happening right now with the pandemic, with staff shortages, looking at how you can make things more efficient, and that outsourcing of professional development is certainly happening in a lot of districts. Again, CESA is a solid option, but remember, it's not a static menu. Review that service catalog with your district administrator, with your principals, look at the needs that you have, and if you cannot find a match within that catalog, notify the CESA so they can at least have an opportunity to come up with services that would match your needs. County Human Services have an obligation to serve youth with behavioral or mental health needs, particularly when those manifest in the home or in the community. Be an advocate for your district. Work with your business manager and superintendent, perhaps splitting costs for day treatment with the county, for example, is a better option than not having that service available at all. Collaborating with your neighboring districts for professional development support is invaluable. It's an essential way to ensure mutual aid in the event of a sentinel trauma event at your school or at one of your neighboring schools. For example, if students were killed in a car crash, you'd be able to rapidly and seamlessly interface those outside resources, the counselors, psychologists, social workers from neighboring districts to support your students, your staff, and your families. But that begins up front with collaborating ahead of time so you already know the counselors in the other district. Your counselors have done work with counselors in your neighboring districts. Week 3 shoutouts. Kay shared that each fall her school district meets with 5 neighboring schools for a day of training and networking. That's a terrific way to get to know people. You inventory resources. You also consider how your districts might pool services and supports, especially during a crisis event, as we just talked about. Nicole mentioned that her small district offers nonviolent crisis intervention training to neighboring districts that might have 2 or 3 people who need the training, either initial training or recertification. That saves people the time and the 60-mile commute to be trained. And all of her posts have very strong themes about networking with local resources. Again, she's in a very small district, in a rural district, and that's very impressive to have that type of networking that's happening in a small and rural schools. So thank you for sharing that, Nicole. Leah posted about a major benefit of establishing a county-wide collaboration consortium is that you can have specialized services or supports that cast a bigger net of influence if they are allowed to hone in on and stick to addressing the unique concern that matches their unique skill. I think that's awesome. It immediately made me think of a video I watched about 15 years ago, and I put a link to it when I responded to Leah's post. But the video is Trombone Player Wanted by Marcus Buckingham. So you can find it on YouTube, about 15 minutes long. But in that video, Marcus Buckingham's premise is that people need to play to their strengths, and organizations, if you're in leadership, if you're a Pupil Services Director, recognize the strengths of people and then match those strengths to the need areas in your district. Maybe you have a support staff member who is a whiz at AAC. Yep, that's not part of that person's job description. However, when something has to be done with AAC, some complex programming or whatever, this person knows it, right? Everybody goes to this person. So maybe you rethink that, and maybe you change that job description. Now you've increased your investment in that person. And right, if they left, if they weren't there, it would create a substantial hole in that system, because being proficient with AAC, that's not a skill that everybody has. So there's also this thing of, we try to build up our weaknesses. And in the video, Trombone Player Wanted, Marcus Buckingham makes the argument of saying, you're only going to go so far with building up your weaknesses. Like, I don't type very fast, and I could sit and I could practice and practice and practice, but at some point, it's just much more efficient for me to use speech to text. That's not my thing. I could learn how to make graphics and things like that. That's not my strength. My strength areas are into other places. So I think it's an awesome point, Leah, and also it's well worth your time to watch that 15-minute clip from Trombone Player Wanted. Casey offered a detailed history about a 3-district consortium that she was a part of, and it dissolved a while back. But right now, because she had experienced that, she has longevity in the district. She has that institutional knowledge of the district. She's thinking of this opportunity, right? So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. She's thinking this opportunity to possibly convene the area districts and talk about, let's explore collaboration for mental health counseling and intensive EBD treatment or day treatment, because as she wrote, there's a waiting list for these services and you have to drive. They're not local. So maybe it's time to explore getting the band back together, right? To look at reuniting these districts to possibly provide these services. But right, you can have the discussion. You can bring people around the table. What are our needs? Maybe is there a role that a CESA has in this? Maybe, maybe not. But that is awesome, Casey. So that's what it's all about, right? In trying to identify and inventory your options and then having the discussions. Tiffany and Brooke posted about driver's education and behind the wheel instruction no longer being offered or taught by schools, and how this limits students who might otherwise be able to find part-time jobs that pay pretty well, might be able to acquire employment skills. So having to privately pay for driver's education is more expensive than if it's offered in schools, and it tends to have a greater impact on families that don't have the fiscal resources. So there is this discrimination aspect when driver's education is removed from the school curriculum. When I was in high school, the classroom part of driver's education and behind the wheel were both offered during the school day as part of the school curriculum. Brooke noted that there is a local driver's education business that allows students to practice behind the wheel during their study halls. So I think that's excellent. Somebody used their professional discretion and made that decision. Again, a really insightful tag team post between Tiffany and Brooke. So week 4, as we look ahead to week 4, it's week 4, mental health, trauma-sensitive schools and seeking student input. So here's what you'll experience in Moodle. Suicide prevention resources. Address suicide prevention at the beginning of the school year and again mid-year. CESAs offer that training, so you'll find it in that CESA menu. Also consider how staff will educate students about signs of suicide. The DPI's Trauma Sensitive Schools online professional development is linked out. It's free, it's robust, so consider that for professional development as a Pupil Services Director. The Centers for Disease Control, their School Connectedness web pages, and also how that links over to the YRBS Youth Risk Behavior Survey, so we'll get into those areas during this week. Also, the Wisconsin Indian Education Association, some things they have to offer, along with UW-Madison's Multicultural Student Center, which will participate in outreach. Please contact them. A reflective teaching annotation for this week. Understand the capabilities and limitations of your assessment tools. The YRBS is not a mental health assessment tool. School staff are typically not trained or licensed to diagnose mental health conditions in children, but we're in this time, right, of disruption where they're health impaired and 504 and long COVID is happening, and the roles of teachers are changing to catch up, but they're not there, right? We don't have where teachers could identify anxiety or depression or what these tools look like and how they might have been normed on school age children. So it's very complicated right now during this disruption transition phase, where I believe that is going to come into place down the road with the reauthorization, for example, of IDEA. But right now we are in this kind of awkward spot. How do we identify that students have mental health needs? What are we using as an assessment tool? Are we working with a third party? This is where your community health needs assessment and working with your outside medical providers can really be a boost to the district, because they would have those appropriate assessments and be able to work with your district in bringing those in or providing staff to conduct those assessments. Student-to-student relationships have become more complicated in our time of social media. So I recommend having your counselors, a school resource officer, even a local district attorney coming in and informing students of the consequences of harmful relationships, particularly sharing images on social media. This is a way to be proactive. Often students, again, the brain is developing. They're not thinking about the long-term consequences. There can be situations where students end up on registry lists. Right now in this digital age, these are considerations that you need to know and consequences that are out there for behaviors. This goes beyond code of student conduct, right? If a student is posting an inappropriate picture from another student that they've had a relationship with, that student is underage. And so again, getting in front of this, it always seems to be in the news in some districts where a photo or some photos get out. They work their way around the student body, the big investigations, and when I've researched some of those articles, what I typically find is the students just also said they weren't aware of the magnitude of the consequences of their actions. Not an excuse, but again, to come out in front of this with counselors, SRO, your local district attorney. Positive to negative ratio, 4-to-1. So 4 positive things to 1 negative. Live it. Practice it with PBIS. So if your school is it's creating its own PBIS videos, PBIS activities, say we want 4 positives to every negative or more than 4 positives. Observe for it. Watch for it when you're observing teachers deliver instruction, when you're observing staff interacting with students. Again, it's a big part of culture. It's a big part of school connectedness. I know a school that actually put that in as a school policy about 15 years ago, that they would staff would have a positive to negative ratio of 4:1 when interacting with students. Syllabus. So some things from the syllabus. Read chapter 1 in School of Airs right here. The first chapter is how thinking about a bagel can get you through the worst day of your life. So what does that mean for authentic experiences for students? And a question to consider as you're going through that is, we have the Metaverse right now. We have where schools can subscribe for virtual field trips. And a group will come in and they'll outfit the kids with, goggles and maybe a few haptic sensors. And suddenly, whoa, you're in Washington, D.C., or you're walking the Oregon Trail or something like that. So as we get into that, there's an argument, right, that maybe that's more inclusive for students. Maybe, also you don't have the issue of cost coming in with that, where it can be prohibitive to do some of these trips. But what is the other side of that? The authentic experiences that we're providing to all of our students, the balance in that. So we just don't transfer into all of these simulated experiences for students and not authentic experiences. So obviously when students are interacting in an authentic environment, they're not as well prepared if most of their interactions have been through these VR environments. And strangely, that's happening more and more. Read my blog post about Abeyance Agreements. They're also known as preexpulsion agreements, and they go by different names. But be cautious with those types of agreements in your district. Be informed that they do not originate from education law, and they could be a discriminatory practice if used to deny students services. So here's an example. We had it with Jeffy and Susie in our previous week. So what if Jeffy had been the author of 9 bullying events that he had been the author. And instead of a response to that, whether it be a restorative response, whether it be identifying there's a pattern of behavior, maybe we're going to do a special education evaluation, a referral to a counselor, whatever it is. But what if instead the school said, and this usually happens for high school students, we're going to issue this pre-expulsion or this abeyance agreement. So basically, if you follow the rules for a quarter or a semester, this will vanish. It doesn't go into a record anywhere. Well, that's kind of destroying a behavioral record, right? Because we haven't created it. It should have been created. Now, what if we get down the road and there isn't this longitudinal database where we can come in and say, wow, like this has happened quite a bit for Jeffy. We need to look at this now as a pattern of behavior and match up the appropriate assessments and possible resources. You wouldn't have that. These would all seem like one-time events, especially as staff turnover, students go from middle school to high school, things like that. So I want you to think about that. Some schools use this quite a bit, and there might be times to use an abeyance agreement, but it also ensures that suspension numbers look to be low when activities which might have generated a suspension 10 years ago now generate an abeyance agreement, which is not reported to your school board, it's not reported to the state, it's not reported to the feds. So it is one of these, I think, I wouldn't say it's a loophole, but it's something we don't measure. We don't have to record it. So when these behaviors happen, these abeyance agreements take place, I do think it can be to the detriment of a student. As a pupil services director, be aware of that and understand how your district is using these, if they're in use, what the frequency is, and again, if they are being used in place of creating a behavioral record, which then could potentially inform the student services down the road. Thank you, everybody.